Okay, we're going to start the meeting. The meeting of the Pennichuck Water Special Committee is held today, Wednesday, March 29th, 2023 at 7 p.m. in the Aldermanic Chamber. Let's start the meeting by taking a roll call. Mr. Clerk, will you take the roll?
Chairwoman Klee.
Here.
Alderman at Large O'Brien. Alderman Dowd.
Present.
Alderman Lopez. And Alderman Moran is here. You have 3 in attendance.
Thank you so much. And Alderman O'Brien and Alderman Lopez had contacted me that they would not be in attendance today. Also in attendance is Mr. Goodhue from Pennichuck, Jay Lusting, Don Ware. I don't know all the other gentlemen. Chris County.
John Bovair.
John Bovair.
And George Torres.
And George Torres. Okay, I'm sure we'll hear their names again. Is there anybody from the public for public comment? I see none. Communications. Without objection, I will suspend the rules and allow 2 communications that were received from the agenda after the agenda was prepared from Larry D. Goodhue. Mr. Clerk?
I'd like to make a motion to recommend to elect the following individuals to the Pennichuck Corporation Board of Directors until their successors are elected and qualified. Elizabeth Dunn, H. Scott Flegel, Ralph Jenkins, Deborah Novani to the Pennichuck Corporation Board of Directors as Class B directors, each for a 3-year term, and until their successors are elected and qualified, and to authorize the mayor to transmit by proxy card the vote of the sole shareholders to the Board of Directors of Pennichuck Corporation.
Mr. Goodhue, would you like to come up?
Sure. I'll have a few.
Please. There's plenty of space.
At the green light's on, they're on.
Yes, the automatic light, the mics are always live, yes.
Got it. Good evening, thank you.
Did you want to speak to these individuals or?
Sure, actually, I can just indicate that this is for the re-election of seated members of our Class B directors. But with me tonight, stepping in for our chairman, who was unable to join us tonight, is one of our board members, Jay Lustig, who is also a member of our nominating corporate governance committee. So he'll speak to this.
Okay, thank you.
So when the city acquired Pennichuck, we set up the board of directors in 3 different classes so that everyone wouldn't turn over simultaneously. B class is on now. Betty has been on the board since the inception, so she carries a bunch of institutional knowledge along with her. The board in the nominating committee vetted all these people, voted in favor for renewal of their terms.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the members? It doesn't say here, but I'm going to ask for all those in favor to say yay. All those in favor?
Aye.
And that passes. So there being no objection, I will accept the communications and place them on file. Thank you. Unfinished business?
None.
New business resolutions.
R23-100, authorizing Pennichuck Corporation and Pennichuck East Utility Inc. to enter into a loan with CoBank ACB.
And the motion.
We have to ask for it. No.
Just go
Is
on.
there a motion?
Yeah, is there a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to recommend final passage of
Actually,
R23-100.
thank you very much.
Sorry, I'm filling in.
Yes.
I'm not even sure.
You're doing well.
Alderman Lopez had to be at another meeting tonight, so conflict came up. Mr. Goodhue, did you want to explain this line?
Sure,
It's
and
pretty much an
actually,
annual, isn't it not?
once again, I'm going to pass the baton. This is not part of our
Oh,
annual
okay.
financing. You will see that coming soon for Pennichuck East. But this is a very specific financing request. And as Mr. Torres has assumed the role of Chief Financial Officer as of January 1st of this year, my impending retirement at the end of this year, that was one role to turn over. I'm going to ask Mr. Torres to fill you in on what this is about.
Thank you, Mr. Torres.
Sure, thank you, Larry. Good evening, everyone. So, what we are putting forth here today is looking for the city's approval on basically it's a reterming of an existing balloon maturity over at PEU. Currently, that maturity becomes due in June 20th of this year. It's about $1,025,000, and what we're looking to do is to reterm that with a new and replace it with a co-bank note, roughly approximately about 7.4%. And what that does is it actually allows us to extend the repayment term on that note. As the underlying assets support the note, I think the weighted average of those assets are about 40 some odd years. So it actually closely matches the amortization period of that note with the underlying assets. So it's more of a match as opposed to the assets that are currently undergirding the balloon maturity. It allows PEU's current rate structure doesn't generate excess cash to actually pay off the $1 million. So what that does is it allows us to dedicate those existing funds for operations of PEU and then actually spread out that repayment term over a 10-year period.
Thank you. Just one quick question for me. You said that this was a 7.4%. I know.
Approximately.
Yeah, I know all interest rates are going up. What was it prior to this?
It was similar. It was about...
Actually, the existing loan was a 25-year amortization with a 10-year balloon, but it was only about 4%. But by doing the reterming of this in a fully amortizing loan, the rate impact is negligible. In fact, the rate impact of this on customers in PEU is 34 cents a month. So, the fact that it's at a higher interest rate, we don't like that, but we don't control the interest rates. We've got a balloon due, but by reterming it for an additional 10 years, it really it's a kind of a parity play as far as the financial impact on cash flows that are passed through to customers in their rates.
So in essence, the customer's only seeing a 34% per
34
month.
cents.
34 cents, I'm sorry. Yes,
Yeah, so,
I'm using the wrong term, 34 cents per month.
Yeah.
Okay. Are there any other questions?
That was my question about the interest.
Sorry.
Do you guys issue corporate bonds? Is that something you guys are able to do?
We issue bonds only at our Pennichuck Waterworks subsidiary, which is a subsidiary that serves Nashua and 10 other communities. And the reason for that is you've got to have enough critical mass to actually issue bonds. We issue bonds, our PEU subsidiary is too small, and what we have for capital on an annual basis, even if we aggregated it for 3 years together, we wouldn't have enough. Our Pittsfield Aqueduct Company is way too small. We can't even get bank financing for that. We wind up with state revolving fund or drinking water and groundwater trust fund loans. Pennichuck Waterworks does have enough critical mass that we can issue bonds. We do an annual bond issuance. We issue them using the New Hampshire Business Finance Authority as a conduit to the bond markets. We actually have this year's bond issuance being priced on the 12th of April and closing on the 26th of April for this year's annual bond issuance, which is all part of a multi-year facility that this committee and the Board of Aldermen approved on our behalf about two years ago for multiple years of financing, $57.5 million over 5 years.
Do you already know what, I'm sorry.
That's okay, please.
Do you already know what the rate's going to be? Or
No,
have to wait
you
till
don't
the
know until you
14th?
go to market. We can tell you that what we've been seeing, though, is even with the disruption in the financial markets, money's actually fleeing banks in some uncertain areas and actually going towards munis. And even though we're not a municipality, our bonds are issued in the municipality space. And so as a result, there's an attractiveness there. And what we're seeing is, number one, the bond market is fully functioning, and we're not seeing a great deal of disruption in those rates. We've been able to issue our bonds over the past several years, probably in the 4 to 4.25% range on a tax exempt. We're an A credit, not like the city. The city is
AAA.
got a much better credit rating than us.
Yeah.
But we are an A stable rating. They just affirmed that at Standard & Poor's about 3 weeks ago. And I'm fully anticipating that we're gonna see something in that 4 to 4.25 range. Last year was 408, I think it was, at the end of the day, Don or
Yep,
George.
yep.
And so, that's how we go and issue into the market. So, again, we don't issue a lot, but every single year we're issuing tax exempt and a small taxable tail, because we don't issue enough to capture all the cost of issuance in the tax exempt bonds themselves.
That's great.
Alderman Dowd.
Just as a moment of learning, when we issue bonds in the city, like the bonds that we've been passing lately, in the financial section, they give you an estimate of what the percentage is going to be, and it's always high. You don't know what the percentage is until you sell the bond.
Right.
So that's just an estimate, and Treasurer Fredette and now Treasurer Griffin, they're always put it much higher, so
Yeah.
we always come in a positive way when we sell a bond.
What we've done, in order for Standard & Poor's to rate us, we actually model the future as to what the impact of these bonds are and our future plans. And I think that we're modeling them at 5.5%. So you're being conservative, you know what I mean? Just as Mr. Dowd just indicated. We won't know until the afternoon of April 12th. So we have a pre-pricing call on the 11th. We have a before market sale call the morning of the 12th. They go out and they market and sell, they fill the book of business, and they come back. And we have an ad hoc committee of the board that is set up as a pricing committee to approve the sale of the bonds. And a lot of it has to do with structure, whether they're issued at a premium, whether they're issued at a discount, whether there's a call date. We've issued bonds in the past with a 10-year call provision. Indications are from our underwriter right now, they're looking at an 8-year call provision. And what's the advantage of a call provision? In that, what that means is, at that call date, you can reissue those bonds without a penalty. Okay, you can basically mature them early, okay, if the rates are favorable and you have enough remaining useful life to reissue tax exempt bonds for the remaining useful life of the funded assets.
Oh, I bought a ton of bonds recently, so I'm glad I'm here.
I'm going to interrupt you for a moment. Just for, I need to apologize to our admin person. The last speaker was Mr. Goodhue. We need to say who we are, so
I'm
when
sorry.
she's typing the minutes and so on. So I apologize. I'm Alderman.
So the person that was talking very fast was Mr. Goodhue. I have a bad habit of doing that, sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I've researched so much of the bonds recently. Hearing all that makes me feel very confident in what you guys are doing over. I bought a bunch of Credit Suzy at, on a resale, hoping and crossing my fingers that I'll get a better return. But to hear that, you have an A bond rating and that you're around 5% on the conservative payout is great compared to what else is out there. So.
Yeah, we hope that the rate will be as low as possible, of course, because that's least impactful on our customers and in our water rates. But we must issue the bonds every year because we have to repay the money we've drawn down on a fixed asset line of credit to fund capital improvements during the trailing calendar year. So it's an annual event in order to match up debt with the lives of the assets that have been paid for.
Thank you. I learn more and more about what you guys do every time I listen to one of these meetings.
Are there any other questions? If not, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And that motion carries. New business ordinance,
There is none.
general discussion. Mr. Goodhue, is there anything that you wanted to add?
What we did present at the end of last week was not just the proxy card and the proxy statement, but also the annual report to shareholder. A report is prepared quarterly for quarterly results, and then the annual report shows the fourth quarter and the annual results. Mr. Torres and his staff are responsible for preparing that. I review and probably sign off on it. I think my name's at the bottom.
Yes.
And it probably won't be the next time you see it, but if you've got any questions on that, I would ask Mr. Torres to make himself available to answer any of the questions you might have on that report.
Are there any questions? No? And that, just for the public record, that is also on...
Mr. Goodhue.
Mr. Goodhue, thank you. I wasn't thinking that, but thank you. But the public, this is on your website as well. I've seen it.
That is correct,
Your
yes.
financial papers and everything else
That is
are there
correct.
for the public to be able to see.
Yes.
Alderman Dowd, I'm sorry.
And just a couple quick questions. One, Where are you right now relative to replacing the water lines on any streets that need to be paved by DPW this year?
So I will ask our Chief Operating Officer, Mr. Ware, to respond to that question, please.
So I'm gonna downstream this to our chief engineer. So
come on up, John.
down, he would know the specifics of.
Come on up, John, you gotta be in
Come on
front
up,
of a
yep.
microphone.
I will
Have a
say,
seat, or you can sit, have a seat.
before he gets
Yep.
Yeah,
on to
please
that,
come on.
Alderman Dowd, one of the things we do, because we cannot keep up with the city's paving program, one of the things we do relative to services that need to be replaced, we are replacing services actively where we may not be replacing the main, so that at least we get the services taken care of underneath newly paved streets if they've reached retirement or need to be replaced. But relative to mains, John, if you want to.
Again, John Gloria, the chief engineer. To answer your question, we're right on schedule, to tell you the truth. We've actually issued contracts the past couple weeks. Those contractors are on schedule to complete that work. The one that's most important, I can't remember the individual streets, but they should be done by around the August timeframe in time for the final paving to be done.
Two that I'm concerned about, Winter and Locust Street,
Winter and Locust.
they're around the
About
Franklin
Franklin.
Street.
Yeah, I believe those are there. I'd have to go back and look. We've got maybe about 15 streets that we're working on this year,
We're
so,
pushing them to get Winter Street and Locust Street
yeah,
paved
Yeah.
because they're in terrible shape.
right. But what I would say is that our work is scheduled to be done in time for paving to be done this year.
That's good.
And what we don't know is it may be that Winter and Locust Street, the water mains are not up for replacement at this stage based on the asset management program.
Yeah,
and-
Don,
and
those
looking
are
at it.
familiar names. I just don't have the list in front of me right now.
I'd be shocked if they,
I know that we were talking West Pearl Street today, and,
Oh.
where they have to do some work, we're gonna have to do, we weren't expecting to do that as well, but we're gonna be able to fit, our stuff in for this year.
Yeah.
And I think there was one or two other, smaller activities that we're still working with DPW on, so.
thanks. The other thing, I know all the names on here for election to
Please
your
stay
board.
seated.
And I'm familiar with all of them, and I think they're great selections.
Great.
I don't know where they find the time, but
One thing to remind this committee is our board has certain requirements. It can be anywhere from 7 to 13 members. Of those members, 5 must be residents of Nashua that are not part of city government. One has to be a customer of ours outside of the community of Nashua, and one has to represent the Merrimack Valley Regional Water District. And then you have up to 6 at-large members. So of the slate that's being reelected right now, Scott Flegel is a Nashua resident. Deb Novotny is a Nashua resident, so that's 2 of your 5. Betty Dunn is our customer outside of Nashua. She's a customer of ours in Wyndham. And then the last remaining one, Ralph Jenkins, is an at-large member who was just elected in a special election a couple of months ago
Right.
to replace a board member who had to resign prematurely due to some personal situation. And so, you just elected him to the board, and now knowing full well that he was gonna be up for re-election. So,
the only other thing I have is, Larry, you better be careful when you retire, because as soon as you retire, people know you got time available in your hands, and you become as busy as I am.
I'm changing my phone, I'm changing my address, no.
I'm busier now than I worked at BAE.
I'm sure. Do you have any other questions that we might be able to ask? We also have our Director of Water Supply with us in case there
I'm
was
gonna
any
have a
questions
question, but
there.
I'd rather, Alderman Dowd, are you?
Oh, I'm all set. I asked them a question earlier.
The question I have is specific but yet general.
Okay.
It's about the Bartlett Street, Columbia, that area there. I know that with that new build, and that's why I asked him to stay, I had a feeling it was going to be here. I know with that new area, one of the provisions that came through was Pennichuck kind of asked them to hold off on the pipes and so on that they were going to be putting through because you were going to try to enhance that system. Is that still, I know there's a negotiation going on with our legal and so on as to
Right.
how they bring it in, so I'm not gonna talk about that, but if you could speak to how it could enhance that. I would really appreciate that.
Right.
For the
So
residents there.
that is that's certainly an area of the water distribution system that we're very interested in. Some of the mains are older mains, they're
Right.
smaller diameter mains up there, and it sits kind of high on a hill. So there's limited, lower pressure in those areas. So one of the things that we're working with, there is a project that we're looking at that if the water were to be brought, working with that project, could in itself, the way the mains would connect through that project and over, from a larger main that we have running through Greeley Park, and that would tie into that would help from the standpoint of offering another direction for water to flow into that area. But having said that, just like every year, our asset management system, the way that we look at mains and in criticality and performance of our system, that's an area that is on the radar.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we have several areas of the community that are on the radar, but it is certainly one of them. Those mains are quite old. They're on line cast iron, so we would like to, those are typically a project that we would look to replace. Now, if there are, obviously if there's paving or other, when that does start to show up on a paving plan, we would certainly, want to, get in there before that paving's done. I mean, because generally it's, 7 years
Yeah.
for a moratorium. So if we can get in there and not have to wait another 7 years, that's great. And I will say this, our engineers who are on top of that have been meeting regularly with the DPW staff. So the communication has been great. And they understand that we certainly, as Mr. Ware said, we can't keep up with the city paving, but it's certainly these where they're critical, we'll get in and try to do our best to fit them into the budgets as long as we have some time to plan for that.
The reason I brought this up, and Mr. Ware and Mr. Goodhue have heard me nag about this quite a while. I hear from many of the residents in that area that their water pressure is extraordinarily low, even some that have put in the enhancing pumps or whatever they're called in their front. I know one specific on Elliott that had done it and still had. And low water pressure may not be low in the legal sense of it, but low water pressure for them is you flush your toilet, can't wash your hands, or
Yeah.
God forbid if someone's taking a shower thing. I grew up that way, so that was just normal for me.
Yeah.
But
one of the initial plans we have is there is a higher pressure zone. There's 2 zones in that area. It's not a huge difference, but would be able to run some of the higher pressure in there and connect, and then still have interconnections with the larger system to still provide fire flows. But that actual higher pressure from the domestic side would help. Some of those, and it would mean closing off some valves, so you isolate that high pressure because it obviously can't support that large of an area, but it would definitely, the people who are up at the higher elevations up on top of the hill would see an improvement there without even making any water main, replacements at that point. But eventually those mains are old enough and they're on the radar.
as Don has told me quite often, that's a very old section. one of the original sections, I think.
Well, the original reservoir was,
Yes,
that's
up
why
on the hill.
Reservoir Street was up at the top of the hill, and
Yeah.
that fed water to the entire city.
Yeah.
And at one point, there was a water tank, as I think
Yes.
most people are aware here, that was sat right up at the end of Columbia Avenue.
Yeah.
But as John has indicated, that's an area where the pressure is driven by the elevation of water in the area. And the higher you go up, the lower your pressure available to bring water into your house. And so that is one of those high points where we've gone around the city and either built small pumping stations or extended water where it made sense from higher pressure areas. That's what John is talking about here is that the zone as you go down into Manchester Street and up into the Edith Ave area was always an area of low pressure. That got connected back into the water system by the junior high that feeds up and out 101A.
Yeah.
So this project that's being proposed provides the opportunity to leverage that and work with the developer, because the developer under today's pressure standards would have had to build a booster station just for that subdivision. Now instead he can put some money into pipeline and allow us, as John said, by closing certain valves to bring higher pressure into that area to the top of the hill.
Right.
pressure constraints have gotten less and less. People used to be happy from 20 PSI to 125 PSI. Now the range is 40 to 80 PSI, which means if you live only less than 92 feet higher than your neighbor, he would have, if you're the higher one, you're gonna have low pressure, you're not gonna be happy. The lower guy is gonna be angry because he has high pressure. In a city that goes up and down in hundreds of feet, it's, you know, it's a very complicated system with a lot of pressure zones. This is one of the last of the two areas in the city where people have pressures that are 20 PSI or lower in some cases. And we will bring them all up to, in this particular area, with the exception of 2 or 3, to over 40 PSI.
Thank you. Just for reference, those on Wellington that are below that Columbia drop, they have very low water pressure. I know the one on corner Bartlett and Wellington have extraordinarily low
They're right up,
pressure.
right up at the top, yep.
Yeah, so it's all of these
Mhm.
throughout that entire area from Bartlett to Elliott. That's what I've heard from. I'm sure it goes beyond that, but I know up to Elliott, it's been.
Yeah, there's
Quite a-
about
quite a
4 or
concern.
5 intersections, I think, that we're eyeing there. So if you think about it, from that point, go out like, you know, in a circle and grab about 4 or 5 intersections, I
Yeah.
think is what I recall.
Thank you so much. I appreciate all the work that you're all doing. Thank you.
Any additional questions you might have for us?
No, you are always so wonderful to answer my questions.
We have great pressure where I live.
Mine waxes and wanes, I'll be honest. Some days it's good and some days it's not so good. But I think that's just part of where they keep putting more and more houses in, so. Public comment? I see none. Remarks by the alderman, I think we've,
Just one
Yes.
thing to say,
Yes.
you guys weren't here yesterday, but I made a quick quip about full-time aldermen, and I only had mentioned 2, there's actually 3. Alderman Clee, who happens to be cheering today, so I just want to go on the
I made
record
it
and
very
correct
clear.
that.
I made it
Gonna
very
make
clear, I
sure
was
the
not
other
happy.
two were.
Well, one of the other ones is also here, Alderman Dowd, and then Alderman Lopez was at another meeting, of course, working, was the 3rd. I'm just part-time.
I appreciate that, thank you. Is there a motion for adjournment?
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
And all those in favor?
Aye.
And the meeting is adjourned at 7:27 PM.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Email?